Hello, and welcome back, my friends, to a brand new episode of Mikeadelic. I am your host, Mike Brancatelli, the one and only Mike Brancatelli. I think I'm not. Don't. I mean, there might be other Mike Brancatellis out there, but let me tell you, I can assure you, there's no other fucking Mike Brancatelli out there like me. Okay, just like there's no other you out there like you. Sure, there might be a lot of audiences, there might be a lot of listeners, but they're not just a glob, just a mass of robots. No, they're individuals with thoughts, opinions, feelings, and brains all to themselves. So thank you to each and every single one of you individual, beautiful people out there for strapping on your headphones and jamming these things into your ear holes and letting my voice seep in there into your brain, causing your neurons to fire, your synapses and whatnot. Maybe other things firing. But thank you. Thanks for tuning into the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Got a great episode today. I am thrilled to release this episode, and I gotta give a shout out to listener Matt. So thank you, Matt, for introducing me to our guest today, Miguel Conner, host of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Miguel's a fascinating guy, and thank you to Matt, who reached out to me, sent me an email, and said that he thinks that I should have Miguel on the show, that it would be a good conversation. Man, do I love the connection of the internet. I love the ability to reach out there and to communicate with you guys. I love when you guys reach out to me and communicate to me, and then we make awesome shit happen. And isn't it just so fun to make awesome shit happen? I mean, what other better way to live than just to live with always trying to make awesome shit happen? Man, am I really poetic? Well, this is why I love to have guests like Miguel on the show, because here I am on my journey of learning and discovery and introducing topics to you guys. And, Miguel is somebody, he's an author, he's a podcast host, he's just an all-around intelligent and smart guy. And his show is, Aeon Byte is amazing. I recently was listening to a few episodes, and it's all just about all these things that I'm deeply, deeply interested in. So go and check out his show, of course, after you listen to this episode. I think you'll be pleasantly engaged. I think you'll really enjoy it. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between the things that we talk about. And he has some really great guests on his show. And that's one of the things that, finding guests for these shows sometimes can be a little bit difficult. Sometimes they just happen to fall in my lap, which is great. But I really do. I'm not trying to find, I just want to have interesting conversations with people who are intelligent, open, and who really want to, take their masks off and get to the depths of the human psyche and the human soul, and, dive into, just dive fully in. I like I said, I wish I had a better command of language to articulate that better. But what I mean is just people who really want to throw down, I mean, I love anytime I'm out and about, if I'm at a party or if I'm, at a bar or whatever, there's nothing better that I like doing than just diving in deep with somebody. Just let's just jump in and let's just be real and let's just talk with no holds barred, just all in. And, Miguel's definitely one of those guys, man. I mean, it's just it's such a joy to be connecting with people like that. It's always, anytime I'm sure you guys could probably relate to this. Anytime you get into a conversation with somebody, you can immediately tell, okay, this person is a little reserved here, or a little reserved there. They're not going to go down this path. They're not going to entertain this thought. They're not going to, they're a little restrictive. They're a little hesitant, whatever. And boring. I'm out. I guess that's probably why I'm kind of leaning more towards the antisocial end of things. It's just I get bored. I get so bored with anything that's like, my 401k, or like, these stock picks, or like the game, and I don't know, just you guys know what I'm talking about. That's why you're listening. That's why you're here, to get that beautiful ear juice all filled up in your extended skin hanging out of the sides of your heads with holes in them and weird little croissant shapes. Your ears, ear holes. Yeah, so thanks for letting me invade your sensory skin flaps. Yeah. All right. Well, this is a great conversation. And I guess like one of the takeaways that I got from this is there's so much information out there. There's so much knowledge and wisdom, and there's such a diversity of thought and idea, and it's all just being spewed out of these different individuals and all over the globe from all different perspectives, and everybody's perspective is influenced by their own experience that they've had in their life, and the times they've grown up, and who they were raised by, and the knowledge that they came to, and when they came to the knowledge, and the experiences that they had. So there's, when I say that there's a one and only you, that it's truer than true. I mean, it's really, the power that resides in each and every single one of us is truly unique and truly powerful. And I think about this a lot because I love this like Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. I don't have it in front of me, but the gist of it is basically like, man should learn to recognize that gleam of light that shines across his head from time to time, because you will see it in other people's work, and it will make you, kind of a little bitter that you didn't capitalize on it. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like that. It's like, learn to recognize that gleam of light that appears in your head, and really, don't really doubt it. Go with it. And I see that happen a lot. I feel like sometimes I see stuff that maybe I've said or that I've thought, maybe something that I've thought and I didn't act on, and then I see somebody else doing it, like maybe like Dave Rubin or something like that, and I'm like, damn, I had that idea, I didn't run with it, So it's like learning to recognize that gleam of light that comes across your mind and acting on it, because that intuition, that gut instinct, that feeling that you get, it's informing you of some kind of truth of your being that you should be, called to act upon. And I think that when we do recognize those thoughts and we are called to act upon them, it syncs us up in alignment, and we produce good things, and we make interesting shit happen. And when we make interesting shit happen, people enjoy life more, and things become a little bit more fun and a little less miserable. And I think that's kind of the point of it all. But I think what I've learned from this is that, there's a whole bunch of people out there on this, on this Gnostic side, Gnosticism end of things. Miguel Conner with his show Aeon Byte, and the guests that he has on his show. So I think there's a sort of coalition that could be built among like-minded thinkers, like people that are arriving at truths from different places. And I think that, one of the things that I touched on that you guys will hear in this show is kind of arriving at truth, and my journey through arriving at truth and becoming kind of a libertarian and an anarcho-capitalist, and then, exploring with psychedelics and becoming a little bit more spiritual, and kind of where that led me. But ultimately, it's the same truth from different perspectives. So if we can learn how to, kind of share our knowledge and build upon what each other has, that we could really form a group of people here that really are ready to kind of, wake up on a massive scale. I've brought this up before on the podcast when I used to do Part of the Problem with Dave Smith. We had a guest, Gene Epstein, on, and he was like, look, things can change. I mean, if you were to tell me, that the Soviet, if you were to tell me, and when did the Soviet Union collapse? 1988. All right, someone remind me on that. Sorry, I wasn't really alive then. So, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, if you were to tell me, like, I don't know, just June of like 1988 that the Soviet Union would collapse, I'd say you were crazy, but it did. So there's things can happen. There can be a massive shift. There can be massive change, and it can happen. I think there can be a massive awakening. I think the ground is fertile for that right now. There's a lot of people who have woken up to a certain kind of level, I guess, where they're upset, they're angry, things aren't going the way that they want them to go, and they're taking action in whichever ways they know how. If we can somehow, introduce them to, podcasts like this, and introduce them to different kinds of thought, different kinds of ideas, different kinds of dialogue that's happening, and get them to kind of really partner with us and join together in some kind of coalition of basically on common ground, meeting on common ground. We don't have to worry about all these little kind of diversionary issues that we seem to get so caught up in all the time. If we could really focus on the big issues, like if we can form the debate, like if we can get our voices to be included in the conversation where we're always addressing the big issues of, and in my opinion, the big issues are war and peace. I mean, that's really, control, manipulation, oppression, subjugation, war, peace, slavery. These are the big issues. The biggest issues of our time is, really like what is happening with what's happening with our world, what's happening in the environments in which we live in, and what's happening to these environments, and then in turn, what's happening to us by being born into these environments. Being born into these tar pits of toxic culture and just terrible stuff. Is the cycle going to continue on and on, or are we going to keep fighting each other from different ends of the spectrum in this kind of partisan nonsense? Is that going to happen, or are we actually going to meet on common ground, and the libertarians and the anarcho-capitalists and the voluntarists and the minarchists and the Gnostics and the psychedelic psychonauts and the spiritual meditators and the love and light warriors, are we all going to say, you know what? Things have gotten really out of hand. We're marching across the world. Our government is an empire. There's people that are suffering. There's children that are suffering. There's people that are starving. Let's focus on the big issues. Let's focus on what really can change the world. And what really can change the world, as you'll hear in this episode, in which Miguel, articulates so perfectly, is your inner power, your inner strength. It's the individuals waking up. And I think in if I can summarize, this kind of idea of this coalition building, it's really like, look, we're up against something here that wants to squash out the individual, that wants to ruin free thought, free expression, and the individualism, thinking for yourself, right? So we have to protect that at all costs, and I think that there's a commonality that can be found in standing up for the individual. If you stand up for the individual, it doesn't matter what you really. I don't care if you prefer apples to oranges or whatever. I don't care. Stand up for the individual. Fight for individual rights. Fight for be on the side of morality. Be on the side of the rights to do unto others as you would have done unto you. I mean, it couldn't have been said any better than that. All right, we're going to hop into this conversation. It's a great one. I hope you guys listen to the whole thing, and then after you're done, go and check out Miguel's podcast, Aeon Byte. It's a great podcast, like I said, fantastic guests, and Miguel dives very deep into some of the topics that we just scratched the surface on here today. Thank you so much again to all of you wonderful, unique individuals listening to this show. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your kind words. You know, the messages and the reviews I get are a currency in themselves. So if it wasn't for you guys, you know, I might be laying in an alley somewhere with a needle sticking out of my arm. I don't know, maybe, probably not. But I'd be doing something not productive. I'd be doing something definitely not productive. All right, anyway, shout out of the week goes to Matt. Matt, thanks for hooking this up. Thanks for introducing me to Miguel, and thank you so much for leaving me a review on iTunes. So I'm gonna start to read reviews because the reviews are awesome. They help the show grow. They really help the way that iTunes works. You know, the more reviews that you get, the more ratings that you get, the higher visibility you get. And if you guys feel like I do, and you feel like you want to start building a coalition, you want to start, getting the diversity of ideas out there, you want to start, injecting some of this kind of talk to a wider audience, to spread our ideas, to grow our ideas, then go on to iTunes and leave me a 5-star rating and review, and it'll help the show, tremendously help the show. So go ahead and do that. And if you want to go even further, you can go to patreon.com. And on patreon.com, if you go to patreon.com/MikeBrank, MikeBranc, you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. $1 a month. I mean, $1 a month. Okay? $1 a month. Really, seriously. If everybody who listened to the show gave $1 a month, I would be able to do some really incredible things with this show. I mean, higher quality, more, I'm always looking to improve the audio quality. I'm always looking to incorporate other kinds of things into the show. One of the things that I want to do is I want to start to be mobile. If I can take this show on the road, I could come to your town. We could set up we can organize like a meetup, and I could throw out the podcast there. We could have live Q&A. We could have a little party, open bar kind of thing, and just hang out, get deep, rap philosophically, wax poetically, and that's one of my ideas, is that I want to kind of make this show mobile. I love to travel. I want to tell some of my travel stories on this podcast as well. As you guys know, I've been to Peru. I've been to Central America. I've been to Southeast Asia. I've been to Europe. I've been to a lot of places. I love to travel. One of my trips that I want to do is I want to travel around the Pacific Northwest kind of area of the country. I've never been there, so it would be really cool to go ahead and do that. And if I could podcast while I'm traveling, that would be awesome. I'd love to come out and meet some of you guys, do a live podcast, do a show, do a party, and then I would have, I could even go to meet with some bigger name guests, come to them. So I think it would be a really cool thing. And seriously, if everybody that listens to this show just gave $1 a month, we can make things like that happen. I'm working with Psychedelic Milk, Ed Leo. We're doing some big things. We're doing the TriCasts. One of those episodes are going to be monthly episodes where it's going to be me, Ed, and a guest. And so I might be able to use some of that money to invest into that, maybe get some video stuff, whatever it is. I don't have any sponsors for this show. I could get sponsors, but I don't want to get sponsors. I want you guys to fund what you love, man. Help a brother out. It's pretty amazing thing. I mean, it's really, voting with your dollar. I'm a big believer in that. It's like, how do we change the world? I mean, one way is to just start putting your money to places where you actually care about and you believe in, whether it be buying from local farms rather than the supermarket or whatever, just any way that you can put your dollar into action and have an impact and kind of, like I said before, make cool shit happen. That would be awesome. You would be making some seriously cool shit happen by contributing a little bit of leftover scrap money that you probably change that you take out of your pocket. What do you have? A couple quarters, some pennies, a nickel. You throw into a jar, or you throw into your car or something like that. Save that. Put a little scribble a little Mikeadelic fund or something like that. Throw it into the Mikeadelic fund. $1 a month, $2 a month. I got a whole section of rewards and stuff too. I want to give shit out. I want to give out free t-shirts. I want to give out stickers. I want to give out all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah. So if you have a little bit of extra scratch laying around, you can throw my way. If you got some Skrilla, you got a little extra cottage in your pocket. I don't even know, are these real terms? You got some bread that is laying around getting stale. You got some Federal Reserve notes that you just can't stand looking at because goddamn the Federal Reserve. Get rid of them. Give them to me, and I'll put them to good use. We'll spread this message. We'll grow this message, and we will penetrate through into the minds of the masses. Anyway, thank you again to Matt, and I want to read his review. So it's Quint Kid 1873. So much more than just discussions about drug use. Mike talks to interesting people who come at the ideas of expanding consciousness through a multitude of different ideas and experiences. Even for someone that doesn't experiment with drugs, the show provides tons of insight from different people about the human experience and the world beyond our base sense perception. Definitely recommend. Awesome. So there you go. So we have one of those people on the podcast today. Enough of me. Thank you so much for all your kind words and support. Thanks for contributing to the Mikeadelic Fund, whether it's liking the show, sharing the show, telling a friend, neighbor, coworker, dog, pet, child, anyone, aunt, teacher, or going on to Patreon and donating money or leaving an iTunes rating and review, whatever you do. I love you guys tremendously, and thank you so much for listening to the show. Without further ado, let's hop into this amazing conversation with the one and only Miguel Conner from Aeon Byte at Gnostic Radio. Miguel Conner, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Or is it perception?
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
Podcast Aeon Byte. I think you guys would have a great discussion. So I didn't know anything about you or your podcast. I checked it out, immediately loved it, and really glad that you're here today to talk to me.
Cool. Thanks. Sounds like a plan. Yeah, same style I do. So yeah, no problem.
Welcome to Mikeadelic. So Miguel, you run a podcast called Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. What is that all about? I could tell from the title there's something to do with Gnosticism, but maybe for our listeners who are unfamiliar, tell them what this is all about.
Yes, Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Well, it started out once upon a time as coffee, cigarettes, and nooses. Was my little niche corner in the podcasting world about 10 years ago, before podcasts were even big. But I had become interested in Gnosticism, didn't know much about it. So I said, well, gee, what's the best way to learn about something and show it to the world? So I decided to start this podcast. I started at Free Thought Media, which was an old, an atheist radio station, internet radio station. And they gave me a slot. And lo and behold, I was very lucky from the get-go to get, with no experience, to get some of the leading scholars in Gnosticism and even Christianity that included Bart Ehrman, Elaine Pagels, Robert Price, Tim Freak, and others. So it went well. It really just started sort of as a volunteer thing, not even a hobby, but again, a way to sort of give to the world something that I had become interested in, something that was helping me out in my own life. And it sort of grew. Eventually, Free Thought Media went out of business, and I just took it to my own website. And I always thought, well, I'll just keep doing it until I run out of, until we've discovered everything we want to know about Gnosticism. But that hasn't happened. And of course, the show Gnosticism, since it's had a very interesting and unique footprint on history, definitely touches upon other topics historical Gnostic groups, groups that they've overlapped with, like the Neoplatonists, occultists, magicians, alchemists, and so forth. And even in modern times, Gnosticism definitely overlaps or is influenced or has influenced great characters that I really admire or like, and or that certainly the public would find intriguing, like Carl Jung, Philip K. Dick, and even some other modern myths or manifestations like The Matrix and other movies. So to me, after 10 years, I find Gnosticism even more intriguing than ever. In fact, I find it more useful than ever, considering this sort of insane times that we live in. I think the Gnostic attitude 2,000 years ago works just as well 2,000 years now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you're lucky that you actually have a great voice for radio, right? I mean, that's some kind of some kind of serendipity or something. You know, it seems that all of us with these podcast voices or radio voices seem to just gravitate towards the field. But yeah, Free Thought Media ran out of business. It seems like in this insane world, they're trying to run Free Thought out of business altogether, everywhere. Like you were saying, it's been crazy. It really has, and that's interesting that you brought that up, because I was looking at your website, and we're in the About Me section. You were saying that you're trying to bring these ancient connections into modern meanings, and really, I mean, it couldn't be a better time to inject what you're doing into the conversation. I mean, I'm just looking at I listened to a few of your podcast episodes, and they're just like, geez, if anybody wants to just dive into this stuff, start with Aeon Byte and go to Miguel's podcast, because you got some amazing stuff. You mentioned The Matrix, one of my favorite movies of all time, and you had a guest on recently breaking down that in Gnostic context. You had other people talking about archetypes and collective unconscious and just all kinds of great, interesting things that, sadly, we don't really experience in the mainstream, that a lot of college kids aren't really experiencing, because there's insanity happening on college campuses nowadays. So we have to crawl to these corners of the web, so to speak, to find this deep, rich, amazing content. So yeah, I mean, it's really cool that you're doing this, and it's really informative. You're welcome. Yeah, and I come from a place where, I think we're going to do this podcast in a way in which maybe you'll be talking to me and my listeners in a sense where I really don't know that much. So it's like I'm approaching this from almost fresh eyes. I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with some things, but my knowledge is very, very limited. So I'm very interested in, I guess, learning a little bit about some of the things that maybe. Why don't we start where, I guess, how you got started with all this? Before, you mentioned, you said you were at Free Think with the radio and everything. What really sparked your curiosity to explore this subject matter?
Well, I've always been, you might say, a curious soul. I mean, I was the sort of loner type geek who played Dungeons and Dragons, listened to rock and roll, smoked too much pot, read science fiction books, always exploring. I was raised Roman Catholic, but my dad was an atheist, but my mom was a devout Catholic. But she was always very open-minded. It was sort of the ecumenical 70s. So Roman Catholicism was sort of hippie. So with all this combination, I was always searching. I always felt like I was an outsider. At times I used to think, well, I was one of those people. I was born in the wrong time. I should have been born in the 60s, or God, I wish I'd been born in the medieval times, or this sort of romantic thinking, but always believing I was an outsider. And through my life, I explored other religions, other faiths, kept exploring, trying different things. and nothing's really seemed to work. I would try stuff like Buddhism, and it didn't really answer the questions. I would try things like, Hinduism, even atheism for a while, and nothing seemed to work. It's only when I started studying Gnosticism, I said, whoa, these guys really draw the line in the sand with their attitudes. These guys are they are uncompromising. They are radical. They've always been radical in any era, in any situation. They've been very radical, and they have this sort of intense, lucid punk attitude about them. Even though in their text you might think, well, they're just sort of these nice Christians, but when you start reading their works, they're very intense, they're very rebellious, and they really call you to really dig deep into yourself and really take a stand against the world. Really say, I mean, one of the first, you mentioned the Matrix, Mike, and of course, I would tell your listeners, if you have watched the Matrix, if you really like the Matrix, you have yourself a modern Gnostic gospel there, because blow by blow, that is Gnosticism. How does Neo start? Well, it started out like I did, and so many people start out. He's sort of lost in the world. He doesn't seem like he fit. He's uncomfortable. He's in sort of this existentialist angst, and that's what the Gnostic texts always wrote about our plight into this world. We've sort of dropped into this world. We are aliens and strangers in this world, and they use those words too in their texts. We are strangers. And but in the Gnostic text, what happens is you get a revealer as you're searching in your life. And again, people can look at this stuff at the Nag Hammadi Library, and there are other texts, the Gospel of Mary, anywhere they want to look. This is sort of their trope or their narrative. And suddenly there is a revealer. The Gnostics, the scholars call them the Gnostic revealer, the apostle of light, and that takes the form of Morpheus. He suddenly appears from somewhere, and he starts telling him these truths, these hints of something, that there is something beyond this reality. And that's what the Gnostics contended, as those of us who are searching will sort of get this nagging sensation, these visions, or this Gnostic revealer that comes into our lives. And as we begin studying or learning from this Gnostic revealer, there comes the red pill, the famous red pill. Of course, in the Gnostics test, this takes form in different sort of rituals, magical practices, and all that. And then lo and behold, our eyes wake up, that moment of gnosis, that special knowledge the Gnostics talked about, when we open our eyes and we realize that we live in a complete false world, an illusionary world. And even worse, this world, which is more like bad software, a bad hologram, is ruled by these powerful tyrannical agents. The Gnostics call them archons, Greek for prince. Even Paul talks about them in the New Testament and his epistles. And they're lorded over by this being called the demiurge, which is the creator of this universe. And they associate it in their text with the God of the Old Testament, because the Gnostics would study the Old Testament and they just couldn't believe that the God of the Old Testament would be the father of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And they thought Jesus was a Gnostic revealer. Mm-hmm. But they also thought other figures were Gnostic revealers. Mary Magdalene, some in Asia thought it was Buddha, and so forth. And as we awaken, we realize that we live in an illusionary world ruled by oppressive powers, and that our job is to awaken others, awaken ourselves, and transcend this world, and sort of become whole human beings, become fully aware, fully alive, and fully ready to get out of this world and take as many people as we can with us to start the fight. Mm-hmm. That's why I like Gnosticism, because it had they were very uncompromising. They weren't like other religions that said, well, we're just going to make the best of it. Well, there's some sort of plan. Well, this isn't so bad. Their attitude from the beginning was sort of like the alcoholic who says, oh my God, things are really bad. And if I don't change things, I'm going to lose myself. And to the Gnostics, the greatest sin, as the Gospel of Philip says, is ignorance. To be ignorant of your divine nature, to be ignorant of your true home, to be ignorant of the suffering of the world around you is the greatest sin. And you have to do something about it. Release your divine spark, that essence that really belongs beyond the material world to this sort of transcendent God, which they call the alien god, the source of everything. It was more of an ideal or an archetype that's beyond all the gods of this world. So in a nutshell, that would be Gnosticism. And for me, obviously, you can see it as a religion. I see it more of as a metaphysical impulse, as a philosophy. It's something that works on all levels, like the movie The Matrix. People use it as an allegory in politics, in their personal life. They use it as a religion. You can use it any way you want. This sort of attitude, I think, works because as people are finding out in this world, it is sort of a Gnostic world. We live in a world of, as they say, fake news, alternative facts. We live in a world where we really don't know who's pulling the strings, what institutions are lying to us or telling us the truth. It seems that there's always these shadowy figures behind everybody. It's like the Gnostics were accused really of being the history's first conspiracy theorists, and that's what the church fathers called them. But I think that we're right, and we're finding out in this world that, yes, we live in one giant conspiracy theory, and it's a question of finding out who is the man behind the curtain and going our own journey to find what kind of individuals we were meant to be.
Yeah, and it's funny because I relate to that so much, you know, and I understand that journey. Like that was my feeling as well. I always felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong, like no one understood me. I just didn't connect to anyone, you know, that kind of thing that you're explaining. And my path kind of took me to, you know, I got really political, and I became kind of a libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, very much in that scene.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Good vibe, man.
So yeah. And then I also discovered psychedelics. I started experimenting with psychedelics at the same time. So I kind of, you know, one of the messages that I just preach on this podcast is like, you know, just radical individualism. You know, I mean, that if I stand for anything, it's, you know, that you have the power. It's all about you discovering, you know, your inner power, releasing it onto the world. So I guess here I am talking like a Gnostic and not even really knowing it. So that's interesting to know. What do you think it is about? You know, we're talking about these people who feel like the outsider, who feel like, you know, like myself, like you, like Neo from the Matrix, like other people out there. I know my listeners of mine who message me with the same kind of sentiment. What is it about this world that we live in that makes some people receptive to this message of awakening and other people are just totally, it's not even in their purview?
That's a good question. I mean, assuming for those who feel like outsiders, it really is a simple intuition that we have been programmed since we were born, that everything is a fabrication and a construct to really make us into cattle, to keep everything organized, to keep everything down, to keep every sort of artistic and creative expression pretty much bland, to keep us, again, to keep everything the show running. But it's obvious that this is not a good thing, and it's obviously that things are being mismanaged. Whether we looked at our world, we can almost feel that things just aren't right. There's something wrong with society, and the Gnostics would say there's just something wrong with the universe. We're cast down in this universe where every form of life depends on the suffering, death, and consumption of another form of life, where the laws of nature sometimes don't make sense at all, and everything seems there's a randomness and an almost like a cruelty in animal nature, in the animal kingdoms, and in human societies. So this sort of nagging to those who are sensitive, it just doesn't make sense, and it's a matter about asking questions and getting there. It's almost like there is something that we have forgotten. That's what the Gnostics talk about. We have forgotten who we really were before we were cast into flesh, before we were thrown into the society. And it's about remembering what our destiny is, what our true potential is. So that just makes people feel, of course, that they are lost. Other people, well, sometimes it's just easier to just sell out. I mean, ignorance is bliss. I mean, it's nice just to have a 9 to 5, an iPhone that works, go on your social media feed and sort of think that you are part of something wonderful. But that's not really what's happening. I mean, anybody with any sensitivity knows that this there is most of life is suffering in one way or another, from the animal kingdom to the people. I mean, Buddha said life is suffering. That is, there is a pain that's going around, and it's a question: are you going to numb the pain with the tools that society has given you, whether it's that drugs or television or something else? Or are you going to try to break out and find some deeper answers, look beyond from some sort of peace, find out who you are and what kind of individual you are and how you can best serve others? So I see that's it. I mean, you were talking about, yes, about finding who you are. The Gnostics always talked about finding your inner Christ. They said, you must become a Christ in this world or nothing else really matters. Don't worry about heaven. Don't worry about hell. Don't worry about anything else. Become a Christ in this world, and then you can really make the difference.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a pretty good message to hear. Like, that sounds pretty good to me. I am not a religious person, but I did grow up Roman Catholic like you, and my parents, still my dad actually, he got into a car accident a couple years ago, and it kind of reinforced his faith, because he survived and he considered it to be an act of God and whatnot. And, I was kind of like a militant atheist for a while, and I would argue and yell at them and stuff. And, you're going nowhere talking to a brick wall when you're doing that. People usually don't respond to angry atheists. But I went to go see him on Father's Day. He did this thing at the church, so I went to go see him to kind of show him a sign of support. And it was interesting because it was the first time really being in a church for me in a long time, maybe like 10 years or something like that. And it's just interesting in the way that they go about their teachings and the way that there's a real hierarchy there, and there's a real kind of, it's almost like I'd believe that Jesus was kind of a Gnostic, revealer, Gnostic teacher. And it seems to me that the message of find the Christ within inside you is a great message to tell to people, And then, I'm listening to this stuff in this church, and I'm just looking at these people as they kneel and as they stand and as they sit. And and there's this constant question. It's like, is it good? Is it good that they believe in this? Is it good to believe in something? Is this making them a good person? Or is it like, well, these people are just a bunch of fools. This is just as crazy. I need to wake these people up. I need to run on that stage, grab the microphone from the priest and tell them that they're all slaves. What is there a balance? Is there an acceptance? It's very vexing to me.
Yeah, it's never an easy thing. I would say the question that the Gnostics would ask is, are you free? That's what it started. The ultimate quest in their texts beyond self-knowledge is liberation. Are you a free person? What you're doing today is in making you free. When you read historically, before the church wiped them out and other governments wiped them out, you find this message, you find this sort of mixed soup of people who did many things. They did many rituals. They were part of many cultures. They weren't really, it was hard to find out who the Gnostics were. They were almost like chameleon. They just blended into their cultures, into their societies. But what you find is they sort of adopted things and these rituals in order to find liberation. What made them dangerous at the end of the day wasn't because they were radical or grabbing microphones or anything like that. In fact, the church fathers used to get mad because they'd go up to them and said, do you believe in Christ, this and that? And they would just nod and say, oh, yeah, sure. And they would go, well, do you believe in this? And they'd look at them and say, oh, yeah, sure. And then they just walk out and do their own thing on the weekdays. Because, again, they were interested in an inner transformation, and they knew that the most dangerous place they could have was the most dangerous weapon they could have was their ideas. And once they started writing their ideas and spreading those out, people knew who the Gnostics were, and they became too much trouble because, again, they were preaching these notion of liberation, individuality, transcending the world, and so forth. So what I always tell people is like, look, whatever you want to do or look like or be, that's fine. But are you free? Do these things make you free? And sometimes I go to church and I just interpret the service the way I want to, or I go out and I interpret things the way I want it, or I find things that make me free as an individual. At the end of the day, again, it's how I express my ideas through the podcast, through my books. and so forth. That's what matters. But at the end of the day, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know how many of those parishioners are free or not, and I don't know how many people are free. I just like you, I just broadcast this stuff, and when people come to me, I try to answer their questions, and hopefully, I can help them find things that will bring them bliss, that will bring them freedom, and that will eventually make them more complete individuals. That's pretty much all I can do. I mean, the Gnostics would say is, look, we are in this bad software world. We are in a giant machine that loves to devour people, that loves to create slaves. We really can't fight the machine as much as what's the name of that song? Rage Against the Machine, the band that I like a lot.
Right.
We really can't. You can rage against the machine, but the machine's going to win. At the end of the day, is how many people can you liberate, and how free can you be? How free can you be? I mean, wasn't it George Orwell who said, "In times of universal deceit, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act"?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you have it. Speak the truth, walk the truth, and you are really a revolutionary.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And it's interesting in this time that we're living in now. I mean, you know, there's an ancient Chinese proverb it says, "May you live in interesting times." I mean, you know, some people would think of that as like, like, oh wow, exciting, interesting times. But you know, interesting times now, you can become almost overwhelmed with. If you go on your Facebook news feed and you go and you listen to, you know, mainstream news or whatever, it's like the world is falling apart. Like, we're living in hell. This is chaos. Like, what the hell is happening? And, you know, especially with what's happening, I guess, on college campuses across America, this kind of invasion of the postmodernist social justice warrior mentality of people. Are you familiar kind of what's happening? It seems like to me, and I kind of, you know, when I used to do my political show, I was on this other show that we used to do kind of current events and political topics, covering the election and whatnot, stuff like that, and the culture. But it seemed like to me that this is like the hot thing that everybody wants to talk about nowadays. This is the hot, you know, thing that there's these social justice warriors on college campuses, and they have these safe spaces, and they're restricting free speech, they're shouting people down, and it's coming from these humanities departments, from these ideologues, from these kind of Marxist philosophies, and it's kind of infecting the minds of the youth, and they're, you know, becoming like these insane lunatics, like they're insane asylums essentially. And so now what we have is we have a lot of intelligent people who are opposing them, and they're, you know, coming out with these, you know, videos, and it's this ping pong of back and forth, kind of smacking down arguments, kind of trying to put these people in their place. And it seems like to me, it's just like, God, this is just like such like a battle. Like, I kind of want to take myself out of this battle a little bit and talk about something that's a little bit higher up. I don't want to get caught in the trap of battling these ideologues. What kind of lessons can we take from Gnosticism? What kind of things can we take from, you know, your perspective in implementing it into kind of trying to spread truth, trying to crack through this insanity?
Well, first I would say if you read the Gnostic texts, the rulers of this age, and again, take this as religious, philosophically, literally as you want. Some people think that the archons are aliens. It really doesn't matter. This is it's a attitude, a metaphysical impulse. But when you read their texts, their power comes from a divide and conquer, splitting human beings, splitting the divine spark, and making them basically fight against each other. And that's what I see in these college campuses and all these protests. It's a divide and conquer. While people on the street are fighting, even though it seems all sides don't like the state, the state is up there counting their money, starting their wars, and just running things as they always are. So it's a brilliant strategy, but that's the way it is, right? I mean, college campuses are places for social engineering. The TV we watch are places for social engineering. The media, it's one machine for social engineering. These are all things to, again, make us asleep, make us divided, and ultimately make us ignorant. It seemed the internet was this great democratic medium But once the powers that be, the powers and principalities figure that out, they decided, well, we're just going to flood them with so much information they won't know what happens. But the rules haven't changed, whether it's in the 60s or the 50s or 2,000 years ago. There are those few in power. They're the ones pulling the strings. They're the ones that are creating this divide and conquer mechanism. They're the ones who are trying to keep us asleep and numb, whether it's prescription drugs or television or our Facebook feeds. And the Gnostic attitude is the same. What saves us? Gnosis, Greek for knowledge. Knowledge is always what's going to save us and what's going to liberate us. Knowing ourselves deeply, how we act, from knowing basically that we are programmed robots, that we are constructs. You and I, 99% of us is just it's the culture around us, our parents, education system. It's false. It's not real. What is that 1% that is true? When you know yourself, you'll find out what that 1% is true. And that is a part of you that can reason, that can think, that can be empathic, and that can create. I always like to say the Gnostics believe in creating better than the creator gods who created this false world. We can create better worlds, and we can express those worlds through our art, our invention, and so forth. So self-knowledge, it starts with that we are constructs, that we are false, that we're being manipulated. And then it's knowing the world outside of us and that it is being controlled by a few forces, whether these forces are supernatural or the Bilderberg group or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Your journey, find out what your journey is, my journey. I think it leads to liberation and understanding of this world. Once you find out that, then all this misinformation, all this fighting and so forth doesn't seem to make sense, because you see everybody is really being manipulated. Everybody is being controlled. And the best you can do is perhaps try to wake them up, but first wake yourself up and see how it is. Once you see that attitude and you, as I say, draw that line in the sand, everything becomes clear. Because at the end of the day, all that matters is you waking up, you finding peace, and not letting all these forces, all this communication, all this fake news and so forth sway you. The Gnostics, of course, came from the Neoplatonic, Platonic, Stoic background in those days. So one thing they would say is, look, if your emotions are getting involved, that's not a good thing. That means somebody is controlling you. Some marketing is affecting you. If you're feeling indignant, irate, angry, like those social justice warriors, somebody is pulling your strings and somebody's manipulating. You need to rise above your emotions and go to a place of Zen, a place of peace, where you can actually make decisions and research the right things. I mean, I like the work very much of Jordan Peterson.
Oh, yeah.
I think his work is excellent against politically correctness. And guess what? Jordan Peterson he's a Jungian. He is influenced by Carl Jung. Carl Jung was influenced by the Gnostics. It's this sort of deep thinking into yourself, deep thinking into society. And you might say it's a mechanical breaking down and dissecting and deconstructing of society, but it really is a place of empathy, because you're trying to understand how this happened, what are the origins, and you keep searching for the truth. And then eventually you will find peace. But again, if your emotions are involved, there is a 100% chance that somebody is manipulating you.
Yeah, there's some wizard behind the Oz curtain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's all marketing. I mean, 2,000 years ago, from the first priest who made the sacrifice to the Romans, there is a marketing machine that's there to control the population. Once you understand this machinery, your emotions won't be controlled. You'll have clarity of thought, and you'll have knowledge about what's going on outside and inside your life.
Yeah, that's great, and it really is this kind of, I guess, in the waking up. We've said that a couple of times, waking up, and I feel like I've had kind of maybe several profound moments in my life that have led. I look at it almost as this journey. Like I've had these profound awakening moments, and then I'm like, oh, this is the thing. And then, oh, wait, no, it's not the thing. There's another thing. And then that's, that builds upon the thing that comes before it. But I've had these moments of like, okay, well, this is the problem. It's the state. and it's just the state, and they're the evil, and we just got to smash the state. And like, maybe that's true, but also there's this thing where it's like, you're talking about the awakening to your inner self, your inner power, and this individual kind of journey that you have to go through. And so it's almost like, and so when I was mentioning to you before about how I got involved in these kinds of two camps, on one side, kind of more of like a right-wing libertarian anarcho-capitalist camp, and on the other side, a psychedelic kind of spiritual camp. And the psychedelic spiritual camp, very much infused with like Buddhism, of kind of just inner peace, accept the way things are. It's all in your mind. These are all constructs. We just have to accept it. And then the other one is like, no, there's this outside mechanism, and we need to address this outside mechanism. So I guess what I'm trying to get at, the question that I'm trying to form here as I'm talking about this is, there is this inner discovery that we need, but there is also these outer things that are happening. So it's like, how do we balance that? Or how do you balance that? How do you kind of go about your day and balance that, kind of knowing that there are these forces that are out to do evil out there, but at the same time, you're not going to just grab a sword and a shield and march on Washington and slay the dragon. Although we would like to. I mean, I think that's why we enjoy movies like The Matrix, and we enjoy all these hero stories, where we get to be the hero and stuff. So it's like you want to make sure that you address that problem, but at the same time, it's important to do work on ourselves as well, because I'm nowhere near being, like complete or solved or, figuring everything out. I'm trying to improve myself every day. So how do you go about balancing this?
I drink a lot of caffeine. That's about it. Smoke a lot of cigarettes. No. Yeah, you're right. It does seem overwhelming, especially as you say you awaken. I mean, look, again, we can go back to The Matrix. Neo took that red pill, and he was on a brutal journey. I mean, the brutal journey just started. I mean, when you wake up, it seems the world will throw everything at you, and of course, you will become your worst own enemy, because again, there's so much inside of you that's false that you got to go through. But this is a lifelong process. I always try, and I get, again, like you, I get overwhelmed. The best that I can do today is simply create something interesting. I mean, I always like what Neil Gaiman said: try to leave the world a little bit more interesting than the one you were. And I know Gandhi said, Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world, although I don't think he really said it, but it's a very cool quote. I think I like always saying, be the strange you want to see in the world. Be interesting, be unique, create beautiful stuff, touch somebody, and don't worry too much about marching on Washington. I mean, that's the whole idea. We get grandiose, we get too idealistic, we fall right into the trap. Help somebody today. What does Jesus say? What you do for me, you do for the least of my brothers. Help somebody out in the alley, help somebody in your house, and then work your way from there, because the journey is not going to end. I mean, the Gnostic texts talk about, again, with Neo, these luminaries, that people wake up, would go on these amazing flights through different heavens. It was like a video game, and there's a boss at every heaven, and they got to fight this boss with magical battles or special prayers, and then they'd get to the next level, and an even more powerful boss would show up, a powerful archon. So that's the way it is just trying to break out through these levels little by little. Try to have a lot of faith, because once you've awakened, things are going to work out, not as you want to, but as they should. And again, keep with the journey of self-knowledge, because there's so much about yourself you need to discover you haven't even started. Through years, most of us only hit 1 or 2%. I think that's what Carl Jung really loved the Gnostics. He said they were history's first depth psychologists, because their texts are really about digging deep into yourself, really going inward, but also going outward into journeys, mystical flights, and so forth. But they also had a very Christian sensibility. They were huge into charity. They believed into helping the poor, helping others, and just being as kind as possible. And that's one of the greatest challenges in our time. Any one of us can go out there with a sign and start, marching, and maybe throw throw a tire thing at a professor or something strange like that, and really become slaves to our emotions, which is exactly what the archons are. but just to be nice, smiling, and kind to others, to listen to their pain, to understand where they're coming from, because at the end of the day, they really are a mirror of us. They really are suffering like we are suffering. And in a way, we all want to get out. Like I said, all these groups fighting on the street and complaining, I think everybody knows that the problem is the state. We can't agree on how to fix it, but I think we know that at the top there are some very psychotic monsters who are running the whole show, and they are the real problem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that, we have this reactionary culture that we live in now where it's like, oh, someone said something. All right, we got to react to it immediately. Everything is such an immediate reaction. There's no internalizing, analyzing, and deep thought. I mean, that stuff happens, but you don't see that on Twitter so much, and you don't see that out on the streets.
Well, social media is, it's ruining that's part of the machine, is that
Right.
It's ruining our attention spans. It's ruining our ability to be empathic.
Yeah.
I mean, we just go nuts and we say mean things on the comment section of YouTube or something like that. And slowly, we start losing our humanity, when it's much better just to go out there and help the guy on the alley who might need some food or something, or make a human connection out on the street. So that's also part of the machinery. So you have to be careful, but that's what they've done today. They're basically destroyed our minds. So again, with that divide and conquer thing, where everything's divided into two, and it's me against you, and I hate you, and it's either Trump or Hillary or whatever it is, Republican, Democrat, and we are in this sort of dualistic trap, and it's a horrible trap. And I would say, I don't think it's destroying civilization. It's going to create just more serfs, more slaves, and there'll be a few elite in their little cities and towers counting the money while we count our blessings, because we live in such a wonderful world.
Those bastards. Yeah, no, I mean, you're so right when you say help the guy on the court. I mean, it's like, I feel like everybody just gets so grandiose with their ambitions and with their, I guess, striving to be, make an impact or have a Twitter following or whatever it is. It just seems like there's, the internet can be a great thing, or it could also be a terrible thing. I happen to think that podcasting is such a great thing. I mean, that's why I love doing this. I love getting into these kinds of conversations with people like you, and you have the amazing people you have on your show as well. So there's this deep, rich media that's out there. You just have to go and find it. But what we see at the surface, it's like everybody wants to kind of go to this worldly level. Well, what about your community? What about, helping? What about help yourself and then help the people around you? And I think that's so important. I think that's one of the things that's gotten away from me for a long time. I've definitely had, grandiose ideas, but really, I mean, helping the people around you, helping your family and your community is so important. I love this. I think it was a T.S. Eliot that said, like, we shall not cease from exploration. At the end of exploring, we'll arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.
Great poem.
Yeah, I love that, because it's like, it's kind of like, you're seeing the same place in which you began, with new eyes, with a new perspective, and knowing it in a different way. And I think that has a lot to do. I mean, especially with, a lot of people that I know, they're kind of, they seem like they're on this journey. They've left somewhere where they started, and they're going and they're striving for these big things. But I do believe that there are these values, these morals that we can take out of these texts, like teachings of Jesus and things like that we can put into a modern context to actually help ourselves. I mean, I think a lot of people out there would be receptive to this idea if only they were exposed to it. I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about you're author of a couple of books, Voices of Gnosticism, Other Voices of Gnosticism, and then a novel series, I think, right? Stargazer, Heretic, is it? Or Heretic?
Correct.
Yeah, and The Executioner's Daughter. So yeah, that's pretty impressive. You got a lot of books here. Talk about some of the influences for these books. I know you mentioned we were talking a little bit about the Gospel of Thomas, right? So this seems to be something that you mentioned before. There's the hidden, swept away. So I'm interested to know, I guess, how did these who first of all, talk a little bit about the Gospel of Thomas and I guess some of these Gnostic texts, and then how did they get swept away and kicked under the rug? I mean, I guess I could imagine how, but maybe for our listeners, explain a little bit in detail about that.
Well, contrary to what everybody's been told, Christianity did not start as sort of the apostles getting the Holy Spirit and all this other wonderful stuff, and the church just sort of sprouted around, and the mean Romans persecuted them, and then at some point Constantine saw the light, and then Rome turned Christian. No, that's really not what happened. Again, the Gnostic impulse always says everything you've been told is a lie. Start with there. That's your default.
I like
Start with that on everything. Even when you wake up in the day, be grateful. You have a chance to be helpful, but everything you've been told is a lie. The day is a lie. Find the truth. And as we're finding out so much, and again, we can just go to social media and the political atmosphere today, but history is mostly a lie. It was Alan Moore, who a writer I really liked, who said all history is fiction, and he's right, because we've been given propaganda. The Gnostics would say all of reality is propaganda. It's not nothing that we've seen in history is what it is. So Christianity has started very fluid with a lot of groups, a lot of ideas spreading around, and one of those groups, and they might be pre-Christian, there's some evidence of that, were the Gnostics. They had a different attitude. They didn't see Jesus as somebody who had died for our sins, but they saw him again as a Gnostic revealer, as somebody who imparted the mysteries of the universe and came to wake us up to our true selves. And the Gnostics started writing their own texts, and other groups of Christians, everybody was writing their own texts because, again, they were having visions. They were doing all these rituals, were giving them altered states of mind and so forth, all Christians. Mm-hmm. And these texts began to, you might say, separate themselves as a nascent church began to emerge, as individuals said, hey, we need to franchise this new religion. We need to create a corporation. We need to get organized. But some of these texts are just too unruly. Some of these texts are speaking the wrong kind of Jesus that we would see. So we're going to outlaw these texts, and not even outlaw, but we are going to appropriate them. If you read scholarship, texts like the Gospel of John are very Gnostic. Jesus is going around saying, I am, and I am the light of the world. The world will hate you because you believe in me. The world doesn't like you. It will reject you. Very Gnostic things. And they appropriated the Gospel of John. Even Paul has some very Gnostic ideas. He talks about the God of this world, the ruler of this world. He talks about the wisdom, the hidden wisdom, and how we must awaken to this other God that the Jews and the Gentiles haven't seen. And as with this movement of appropriation and using their own texts, and of course coalescing into a more organized church, because as many have said, the Gnostics were the original anarchists, something that I can relate with them, because they were so individualistic. They didn't believe in the state, and they believed that each person should really find their own path or their own little community. Eventually, the Gnostics were sort of the outside looking in as Christianity became more powerful, more organized, and it became backed by the state. The Gnostics were on the outside looking in, and most of their texts were destroyed, banned. The Gnostics were persecuted. This has happened throughout history. But some of these texts survived, usually in Egypt for the most part. And the biggest cache of these texts were buried in jars and basically spent almost 2,000 years, discovered in Nag Hammadi Library in Upper Egypt. And they were brought out, discovered in 1945 when the first atom bomb was dropped. And around 1979, we got the first English translation, which has given the world sort of a new perspective on what happened on Christianity. So the Nag Hammadi Library has all these texts that include the Gospel of Thomas, although the Gospel of Thomas was found separately, and other texts. And it gives us a good view, not only of how fluid Christianity was, but all the different Gnostic sects and what they believed and their rituals and so forth. The Gospel of Thomas is a bit different because it's not really gospel in the traditional sense where it says Jesus went, did this, that. It's just these wisdom sayings of Jesus, like saying, when you discover the words from my mouth, you will not taste death. The Gnostics like to use death as sort of an aphorism for ignorance. And when you see the light within you, you will go to the light. And all these, it's about 117 sayings of Jesus that sound a lot like the New Testament, but some are very unique and very different. And out of that, there's many other Gnostic gospels, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of the Egyptians, and so forth. So it's a big array. And even today, scholars are just catching up to their teachings and so forth, and what exactly were their theologies.
So it's kind of a relatively new kind of remembering, I guess, of these older texts because they were found after some time of being lost and buried, right?
Correct. I mean, the church fathers had written about the Gnostics and sometimes saved, when they're writing, saved entire Gnostic texts, but we still didn't get an original view. And the church fathers used to sometimes exaggerate, and they had their own bias of what the Gnostics were doing. Sometimes they were right. I mean, some Gnostics were into sex magic, some were into just chilling out at church, some and other things, but it was still a little skewed. So with the Nag Hammadi library and the church father writings, we get a really good view of Gnosticism. And even before 1984, like I said, Carl Jung was influenced by them. He seems to have gotten a lot of their essence and ethos. And you have writers like Philip K. Dick, even before that, William Blake, very Gnostic in his ideas and so forth. Their essence still survived in history and came out. But we'd say it's only just begun because, again, 1979, the texts are out in English. That is, I mean, when you think of the centuries that people have spent studying the Bible, the Quran, all these, all these texts, even the Odyssey, 30, 40 years is a drop in the hat.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's why. I mean, there was, the Middle Ages, right? Maybe they had so much pain and suffering because there's a loss of wisdom. There's this buried wisdom or something. I don't know, but
wisdom's a good word, because the Gnostics did, one of their main heroines was this goddess called Wisdom. She was the like in the myth, Zeus has a headache and he loses Athena. He loses his wisdom, so that's why he's sort of a jerk. The Gnostics thought that the wisdom of God had fallen from the true God and come down to earth, and she was lost, and she was sort of with us looking, but she was still lost, and it was up to humanity to bring her out, to show her to the world. That was one of their great allegories.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, there's so many great little stories like that I feel like we don't really produce much of this today. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit ignorant to it, but I guess I'm talking more in kind of the mainstream view. I mean, I don't know. The mainstream just seems to be filled with such shit. so maybe, but it just seems like these
maybe that's that is. I think you hit it on the head, Mike. That, again, that's part of the social engineering, is to sap out every sort of creativity or individuality from our society. I mean, there is a reason why rock music sucks. I mean, every time somebody like David Bowie or Prince dies, there's nobody in the wings waiting. There's nothing. It's like Katy Perry goes crazy after a few albums. I mean, it's just, there's a dryness, a desert of the real in this society, and that's how they're destroying us. So more than ever, it's really important that we look within and we try to become Christ in the flesh today.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's, when you talk about the light and discovering the light. And I've listened to a couple of your podcast episodes where you talk about, beyond the stars, and, what your website is, The God Above God. And it's interesting. I talked about this on my show. I did this, I went to Peru and I did this ayahuasca ceremony, and I had this experience where I became like a star in the sky. I mean, that's the best way I could describe it. So
yeah, happened to me. Same ritual. I was up there with the stars. I knew there was something out there. It was more than a hallucination. Wait, I'm sure it was the same with you.
Oh, you got to. All right. So please tell us what happened.
Oh, that's I was not in Peru. I was in Portugal, where I'm from.
Oh, okay. Great.
And my uncle is you might say, an elder of this group called Santo Daime from Brazil.
Oh, yeah,
and they do ayahuasca.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of rituals there, and it's very Christian. You just sing all these hymns and all this fun stuff, but you're doing the daime, as they call it, and I did several rituals, and then one of them, yeah, I mean, the things I saw were amazing through these rituals, but it's also brutal. I think that's the point we're talking about gnosis, is that ayahuasca, like having gnosis and the Gnostics, you really look at yourself and you almost hate yourself because every fear, every construct of your life gets thrown in your face, and you're like, whoa, there is something to me that's more than this. I know there's more to me like that. And suddenly through these rituals, you're leaving your body and you're just floating into these other weird dimensions. And there were so many synchronicities that happened when I was doing that, just weird stuff that would happen, that I knew this was more than, again, just your regular hallucination. It just, yeah, I saw some weird stuff, and it was really great. But again, that is very much like the Gnostic experience, transcending the world and looking at the stars in that sort of brutal way where ayahuasca makes you face every demon inside of you and confront it. And sometimes you feel so lost, and then there's just something about you just confronting them. This peace comes and it sort of wipes it all away, and you just have this overwhelming sense of peace. So that in itself is, yeah, that's the Gnostic experience right there. So looks like you've been there, Mike. You've had your gnosis.
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah, and it was difficult actually to like walk away from it, like to like come out of it. After I had this big experience, I was like, whoa, like I just like I don't even know if I could like go back to my like normal life right now. Like this is crazy. Well, eventually, you do, but it's about taking what I had learned. Like, I went through it was like a course of 2 weeks, and there was all these different ceremonies. So it was like whatever happened in those nights, there was always this learning and this understanding, this, like you said, facing these demons. A lot of people, I think, on this show, we talk about psychedelics a lot, and I think a lot of people who come from an outside view think that it's like, oh, you're just, having these crazy trips and hallucinating. What are you seeing, dragons or something? And it's like, well, no, it's a lot more than that. And I think it's, it's a lot deeper than that. Like it's not really, I mean, it is, I guess, hallucinatory in a certain sense, but it's not.
Yeah, of course.
It's realer than real almost. During the experience, it feels realer than real. Like for me, a lot of the times, I feel so in my body, and then I feel so out of my body. I feel such like an animal, and then I feel such like a cosmic being. You know what I mean? It's this kind of dualistic state of wrestling and battling, this journey, this process. But in the end, there's always, like you mentioned, there's like a synchronicity that happens. Like you were doing that for a reason. Things that were being revealed to you are being revealed to you for a reason. And I'm sure did you get some kind of truth or wisdom, or did you put some pieces together from that experience?
Well, yeah, that's. I just started learning about Gnosticism, and I saw this vision of this being called Abraxas, which Carl Jung also saw or experienced. And I knew, and there were a lot of things that would happen. I mean, when I was doing out of body, my aunt, who had a broken leg and lived like down the road, just ran into the church and grabbed me because she had sensed that I was going to leave my body forever, and things like that. I mean, some of the things moving, strange people telling me stuff that I only thought I heard in my head. There was just there was just so much going on there, and I'm sure you've experienced, and that's the key, I think, for getting in society too. We need to experience things. Part of gnosis is not just using your head, and it's not just at your good actions. Those are great too, but what experiences are you having? Are you having deep, meaningful experiences with the world, with those around you, with higher entities? That's what we've forgotten, because again, with all this social media, all this weirdness in our country tearing us, all these social engineering, we've forgotten simply to experience the world as it is and all its wonders and terrors, and seeing how much there is outside that can really transform us. So I think that's the other thing that we're missing. And with the ayahuasca, it may sound weird to us, like you and I, because we had some amazing experiences. But you know what? Somebody like my uncle in his church, they do that every week, and it's no big deal. They live with it. People in the Amazons, they're experiencing life on life's terms, life as it is. They're experiencing every facet of life and every facet of themselves in its fullness, in the inward and outward journey. And that's what we're missing. And I wouldn't say everybody go to ayahuasca. You can find these experiences in so many different ways, draw a painting, take up meditation, take up knitting, find out what gives you the great experience that you need to wake up even more every day.
Yeah, volunteer at a soup kitchen, help some people. I mean, I always get
whatever rocks your boat. Rocks your boat. Everybody's different.
Right. That's
there is no one size fit all. No matter what the rulers of this world tell you, there is no one size fit all. Different things work. Some people, maybe going to church works, and you do get an experience in a mystical state, and you come out just a better person, more liberated, less in your skin. Maybe it's ayahuasca, maybe it's the soup kitchen, maybe it's doing podcasts, but find out what works for you and make sure it works.
It's a great message. And, I agree with that a lot. I think that, there's a kind of tolerance that I can get down with, and it's a tolerance of the diversity of individualism and direct experience, honoring the individual and respecting, one's rights, one's, birthright to have experiences to themselves and formulate their own opinions and their own thoughts and come to their own conclusions. I think that's what it's all about. So 2 more questions for you, and then I know we're heading up on an hour here, and we'll let you go. One is tell people a little bit, I guess, about your podcast, and then just I guess maybe one thing that most people don't know, or that they need to know, or some kind of misconception or something like that it seems to be coming up a lot. Like, what's the one thing that you seem to have to kind of always tell to people or explain? That, and then one more question for you after that.
Good question, because I'm always dealing with misconceptions on a daily basis. But for my site, go to thegodabovegod.com. You'll find Aeon Byte, my blog, my articles, videos, anything else. Feel free to join our mailing list or shoot me an email if you have questions. I mean, as far as misconceptions, I mean, people always thought that the Gnostics were world haters, and they weren't world haters because, again, they had a huge compassion for the world, because they were the ones who woke up and said, man, things are really bad. Animals are suffering out there. People are suffering. The gods, everybody, every blade of grass is suffering and screaming in pain. We need to do something about it. They were just very harsh and direct and pointed with their criticism, but they were not world haters. Again, if anything, they truly had found that they were coming from a place of great love, and they really wanted things to be better, but they also knew the limitations of their own flesh. They knew the limitations of other people's flesh. So the best they could do is create better than the creator gods, as I say, make better art than other people, make things more interesting. And again, just be as imaginative and as kind and as nice as you can, and continue on the journey inward. So that's a big one, is that they were world haters.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, and obviously they're not, and we, you've said, being kind, doing things for others, helping people locally around you. That's a great message. Okay. Last question. I usually ask this one. It's kind of almost like a utopian level type of question. But it basically is like, we're all on this journey. We're all seeking truth. We're seeking wisdom. If we had our way, what would your vision of the world look like? Like, what would an ultimate vision of the world for you look like?
Oh boy, that is a good one. I don't want to say anything because, again, like you were talking about, everybody thinks that their own God in this social media world. We've all decided we're as haughty and as arrogant as the God of the Old Testament, that there is no God but me. But I would say that a simple world of utopia is a world where children no longer have to suffer, and a world where nobody has to hurt children. If we start there, we're in a good place.
Amen. Amen to that. Well, thank you so much, Miguel, for being on the show. It was a real pleasure. Go to thegodabovegod.com. Check out Miguel's podcast, Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Check out his books, Other Voices of Gnosticism, the Stargazer series. All this good stuff can be found at The God Above God, right? And Aeon Byte, the Gnostic Radio, where you can listen to Miguel talk to far more interesting people than me. Go and listen to Miguel's interviews, guys, and check it out. Just
no, man, you're doing good work.
Yeah.
You're doing good work. He's spreading your gnosis.
Thank you. I will. Thank you so much, Miguel.
Thank you for having me on.